Hello, my name is Yuxi, and I'm a fourth-year PhD student at Georgia Tech School of Interactive Computing. Today, on behalf of my co-authors, I'll be sharing our paper, The Slow Violence of Surveillance Capitalism: How Online Behavioral Advertising Harms People. Broadly speaking, people don't like online behavioral advertising. There's extensive documentation of people's negative responses to OBA, and people's perceptions of how OBA works also feeds into these negative responses. As a result, past work has tried to increase user awareness about OBA by providing greater algorithmic transparency and greater agency. However, this past work presents two key problems. For one, negative reactions don't capture negative effects on lived experiences. And for another, transparency and education measures can also further burden users. These negative effects, costs, and burdens that people experience, these are all harms. Harm is both a colloquial and legal term. Black's Law Dictionary defines harm as injury, loss, damage, material or tangible detriment. If someone breaks your window and steals from you, that's a tangible physical loss that you have suffered. But whereas financial losses and physical injury can be clearly identifiable as harms in a court of law, privacy harms like those entailed by OBA are less well understood and often unrecognized. But these privacy harms are just as real. Some harms of OBA might seem initially innocuous. For example, maybe you're browsing something embarrassing in your personal history and it pops up in ads on a work device. Or maybe you feel like you're being spied upon when you see an ad for a product that you thought you only discussed out loud with a friend. Insidiously, however, these small, seemingly mundane events can accumulate into a loss of control over interpersonal context and being constantly surveilled without consent. In other words, this is a lived experience of fear and powerlessness. Other harms are more evidently harmful. Advertisers make inferences on people's sensitive or vulnerable characteristics and create stereotypical or discriminatory portrayals of them. These include things like demographic characteristics like age, gender identity, sexual orientation, and race, mental and physical health conditions, unhealthy body stigma, and bereavement. The examples of harms I just gave are wide-reaching and diverse. Having more specific understanding of the harms that people experience with OBA can help us legitimize these harms in a legal or regulatory context. So, in this work, we ask the question, how does online behavioral advertising harm people? Through a survey of 420 participants on Prolific, we asked people to share with us a recent privacy-violating experience with OBA that they felt was personally impactful. Broadly, we found 4 types of harms that I'll go over on the following slides: psychological distress, loss of autonomy, constriction of user behavior, and algorithmic marginalization and traumatization. So first up is psychological distress. We define this as broad negative mental or cognitive effects that are related to OBA in general. So this includes general emotional distress, disruption of browsing experience, information redundancy, questioning your own browsing behavior, and finally paranoia from suspicion of eavesdropping. For example, some users felt extremely frustrated with the amount of time and energy OBA took up in their minds. Some felt like they were being haunted by seeing the same ads over and over again. Others even mentioned time and energy lost from receiving physical mail after they were targeted online. As its last quote reveals, people said it was a waste of paper, waste of resources, waste of time and energy. Others felt paranoid that they were being surveilled and listened to through their phone and smart home microphones. We note that while microphone usage has been debunked in both academic literature and popular media, users still feel real paranoia from a perception of it. For example, as this participant writes, "It has happened far too many times for it to be coincidence, and all I can assume is that nothing is private anymore. It is sickening." Next, we define loss of autonomy as the denial or limiting of opportunity to make your own choices. This type of harm includes lack of consent or control over targeting, lack of control over self-presentation, encouraging negative spending habits, and limiting consumer choice. This type of harm usually presented as private search history showing up in unwanted places where others could see, such as work. In the quote on the right, the participant shares that she felt extremely embarrassed when lingerie ads showed up on her work computer while she was sharing something with a coworker. She was worried that this would affect how her coworker saw her. And in the quote on the left, a participant shared how she was trying to help a friend going through a divorce and started getting divorce attorney ads on her own. She writes, "This could potentially lead to misunderstandings with my spouse. What if I was showing them something on my phone and a divorce attorney ad came up?" A third type of harm that we uncovered was constriction of user behavior. We define this as the alteration of user interactions with technical systems in response to other OBA harms. Some examples of this include taking additional privacy-protecting measures, restricting utility of personal devices, deleting accounts and disabling devices, and altering natural conversational behaviors. Multiple participants noted taking privacy-protecting measures to avoid OBA. Some, like the quote on the right, remove devices from their home. This entails a not insignificant amount of time unplugging and covering up all their devices, not to mention the money lost on buying the devices in the first place. Others, like the two quotes on the left, altered how they approach having conversations in real life. For example, one participant wrote, "I don't carry my phone with me into other rooms if I'm hanging out with someone, and if I need to search something up, I have to go and grab my phone from wherever I left it. I feel the need to keep distant in order to maintain some sort of privacy and to ease my paranoia." Finally, there's algorithmic marginalization and traumatization. We define this harm as those specific to personal characteristics, like demographics, or vulnerabilities, like sensitive medical information. These harms can present in a number of ways. For example, it can present as violation of boundaries, amplification of self-consciousness, traumatic triggers, or fear of social exposure. As one participant writes succinctly, seeing treatments for the medical condition in an ad felt, quote, akin to a HIPAA violation. As another example, OBA can stifle a person's grieving process. A participant shared that their grandmother recently passed away. They wrote, "I get reminded multiple times a day that I had to lay my grandmother to rest. I see multiple ads a day on Google, Facebook. I'm over it. I just want to be able to mourn and let it go. At this point, I don't want to ever Google anything again." And finally, OBA can also put members of the LGBTQ community in danger by unwittingly revealing information about them. As this last participant, who identifies as a trans man, shares, he saw an ad for a trans pride flag and felt scared that his coworkers would see it. Since he was not yet out to his coworkers, this ad could have put him in physical danger. So, just to recap, this is the diverse set of harms that we uncovered from our participants' accounts: psychological distress, loss of autonomy, constriction of user behavior, and algorithmic marginalization and traumatization. Across all of these accounts that we read from participants, one phrase kept popping up from them. It might not seem like a huge deal. Even though people told us repeatedly that OBA disrupted their lives and eroded their autonomy and diminished their sense of self, they still felt like these harms aren't a big enough deal to talk about. OBA is a form of slow violence, which was a term coined by literary scholar Rob Nixon originally to describe climate change and environmental degradation. These ads are everywhere. The mundanity of these targeted ads makes it really hard for users to devote specific attention to fighting it. Today, there is very little recourse for people who suffer from these harms, as OBA has seemingly become a fact of life. And even as people want apologies and recognition of harm, past work has found that security and privacy experts believe that such mitigations are unrealistic. This extended temporality of slow violence hides a more sinister foundation of social inequality. The people who experience the small harms of OBA and surveillance capitalism have unequal education, access, and power relative to the security and privacy experts who dismiss them. At the very least, privacy, HCI, and fact researchers have an imperative to support the legal recognition of harms from OBA. As Citron and Sola wrote in 2022, individuals whose privacy has been violated need to hear the message that law is concerned with the harms they have suffered. Law's recognition of privacy harms tells individuals that their suffering is real and that their suffering is not just a fact of life that should be endured, but harm that should not be tolerated. Individuals can see themselves as harmed. We envision two intertwined areas of future work to support this legal recognition. For one, we've aggregated hundreds of accounts of how people are harmed by OBA. Doing this in a more systematic way, perhaps through quantitative measurements, could be an interesting path forward. The Brave browser, for example, calculates the amount of time and bandwidth saved by blocking ads and turns this into a monetary value. Third-party watchdogs can also help aggregate a sufficiently substantial number of harms from users to present to regulatory bodies like the FTC. In the meantime, it's often easier for users to produce evidence that they're taking protective measures against OBA, for example, like constriction of user behavior, rather than of the other types of harms. Another area of future work could thus include documentation of action taken to avoid OBA. In summary, in our work, we found evidence of 4 types of harms arising from online behavioral advertising. We also showed that harms from OBA are a form of slow violence and can be overlooked because of the normalization. And finally, we propose that designing tools to facilitate legal recognition can be a promising avenue of harm mitigation. Thanks for watching this talk today. Please check out the paper and feel free to email me with any questions.